Open any English Bible to Genesis chapter 6, verse 4. In most translations, you will find a single word left completely untranslated. Sitting in the middle of the sentence like a locked evidence box your translator decided not to open. Nephilim. But here is what your English Bible does not tell you. That word, that one Hebrew word, appears in the entire Hebrew Bible exactly twice. 2 occurrences. Across all of Genesis, all of Exodus, all of Leviticus, all of Numbers, all of Deuteronomy, twice. And in one of those 2 appearances, the witness giving the testimony was someone the biblical text itself explicitly identifies as unreliable. The English word giants, the word most of your Sunday school teachers used, the word most Bible teachers reach for first, does not appear in the original Hebrew at Genesis 6:4, not once. It was never there. It entered the tradition through a translation of a translation, a linguistic game of telephone that turned a Hebrew word meaning one thing into an English word meaning something else entirely. Here is the verdict. The Hebrew word Nephilim comes from a root that means to fall, not to stand tall, not to tower above, to fall, to descend, to cross a boundary that was never meant to be crossed. The translation chose giants. The Hebrew said fallen ones. Verdict first, evidence later. Let's look at the grammar. Let's go straight to the crime scene. The word is Nephilim, spelled in Hebrew, Nun, Pe, Yod, Lamed, Yod, Mem. And the moment you isolate the root, the 3-letter base from which this word is built, the translation problem becomes immediately visible. The root is naphal. It means to fall, to descend, to come down from one place to another. In the Hebrew Bible, naphal is used when things fall from above to below, when an enemy falls in battle, when a lot is cast and falls to earth, when a person falls prostrate before God. The directional movement is always the same, down. Nephilim is the plural noun form built from that root. In Hebrew, the morphology is standard. Naphal generates Nephilim the way the English root fall generates the fallen. Those who fell, those who came down, the descended ones. Now sit with that for a moment. Because in the previous case file, we established what the Bene Ha-Elohim were, sons of the divine, celestial beings present at the foundation of creation, beings belonging to the heavenly realm, to the realm above. If the Nephilim are the fallen ones, and the beings in Genesis 6 who crossed into the human realm were the Bene Ha-Elohim, then the word Nephilim is not a description of physical size. It is a description of what happened, a designation for what these beings became the moment they descended, the moment they fell. The Hebrew text was never talking about height. It was talking about direction. So where did giants come from? Because it is in virtually every major English Bible ever printed. It dominated the King James Version, which shaped the entire English-speaking Christian world for 4 centuries. It entered the Sunday school classroom, the evangelical bookstore, the pulpit illustration, but it was never in the Hebrew. To find where it entered the translation tradition, we need to travel to Alexandria, Egypt, approximately 250 years before the Common Era, and examine a single translation decision that changed how the entire Western world read this verse. In the 3rd century before the Common Era, the same scholars who gave us the Septuagint, the landmark Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures, arrived at Genesis 6:4 and faced the word Nephilim. They had a choice. They could transliterate it, carry the Hebrew sound across into Greek letters, preserve the word as is, the way the King James eventually did 4 centuries later. Or they could translate it, find a Greek word that communicated the meaning. They chose to translate it. The word they chose was gigantes. And that single decision, made by Jewish scholars in Alexandria working in the 3rd century before Christ, is the direct ancestor of the English word giants in your Bible today. The translation chain runs in a straight line. Hebrew Nephilim became Greek gigantes. Greek gigantes became Latin gigantes in Jerome's Vulgate, and Latin gigantes became English giants in every translation that drew from that tradition. 4 linguistic generations. 1 original word that never meant what the last word in that chain means. Now here is what makes this a forensic problem rather than just a translation curiosity. In the Greek world of the 3rd century before Christ, the word gigantes did not primarily mean enormously tall people. Its original etymology comes from the Greek ge, earth, and gentes, born of, earth-born, those who came forth from the earth. In Greek mythology, the gigantes were beings born from the earth itself, monstrous, rebellious, opponents of the divine order. They were famous not for being tall, but for their nature, their origin, their conflict with the gods. The Septuagint translators chose that word, gigantes, because it communicated something specific to their Greek-speaking audience. Not simply size, but nature, origin, the category of being that opposes divine order, the earth-born counterpart to the heaven-born divine. In other words, the Septuagint translators may have been trying to communicate the correct theological idea through the closest available Greek container. What they did not anticipate was that over the next 2 millennia, as Greek culture evolved and as Latin and then English translations built on top of each other, gigantes would lose its theological weight and reduce down to a single physical attribute: height. And there is something else, something the translation tradition almost never addresses. The Septuagint was not consistent. It did not render Nephilim as gigantes in both of the word's 2 appearances. In Numbers 13, the second and final time Nephilim appears in the entire Hebrew Bible, the translators made a different decision, and that inconsistency is where this case gets forensically interesting. Numbers chapter 13. The 12 spies of Israel have been sent into Canaan by Moses to survey the land. The mission is straightforward: assess the territory, report back, and give the people a picture of what they are walking into. 10 of the 12 come back with a report that throws the entire Israelite camp into panic. Verse 33, the spies say, "We saw the Nephilim there, the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim, and we seem to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seem to them." Now this is the only other verse in the entire Hebrew Bible where Nephilim appears, and on the surface it seems to confirm the giant reading. We were like grasshoppers. They were enormous. The Nephilim were physical giants so overwhelming that trained military scouts felt microscopic by comparison. But here is the part most Bible teachers skip past without stopping. The biblical text does not present these 10 spies as reliable witnesses. The narrative context of Numbers 13 is not designed to validate their testimony. It is designed to expose it. This is not a neutral report from credible observers. This is a fear-driven account from men who have already decided the mission is impossible. Caleb and Joshua, 2 of the 12, gave a completely different report from the same mission to the same land at the same time. "The land is exceedingly good," they said. "Do not fear the people of the land. The Lord is with us." The text then records that God himself characterizes the 10 spy report as a dibba, a slander, a false report, an evil account against the land. In legal terms, the court has already ruled on the credibility of this testimony. It ruled against it, by name. So, when those same 10 spies described feeling like grasshoppers, when they claim to have seen the Nephilim, we are reading the emotional testimony of men the narrative itself categorizes as unreliable. Men whose fear had already distorted their perception, men who are described elsewhere in the same passage as producing a panic through exaggeration. Now, what happens to the Nephilim argument if its only post-flood textual evidence comes from witnesses the biblical court already discredited? The giant's reading lost its strongest corroborating exhibit, and the word itself, the Hebrew word Nephilim, has never moved. It still says fallen ones. It said it in Genesis 6. It said it in Numbers 13. The witnesses changed. The word never did. Before the final exhibit, and this is the one that seals it, if this investigation is already reaching something in you, subscribe right now. Because the ancient world had a name for what the Nephilim actually were, and it wasn't giants. It was something the church deliberately buried. The documents survive, and we are about to look at them. Don't miss the close on this one. In the cave libraries of Qumran, among the Dead Sea Scrolls, scholars discovered something that had not been seen by modern eyes in nearly 2,000 years. The Book of Giants. A fragmentary Aramaic text, preserved by the same community that preserved the Book of Enoch, that focused specifically on what the Nephilim, the offspring of the Watchers, actually were after their birth, what they did, what they became, and crucially, what happened to them. The Book of Giants does not describe the offspring of the Watchers primarily through their physical dimensions. It describes them through their nature, their destructive capacity, their insatiable consumption of the earth's resources, their violence against both humans and animals, their spiritual corruption of the world they move through. These are not beings defined by being tall. They are beings defined by what they carry, the intersection of the celestial and the terrestrial, the divine and the human, producing something that was neither and that the created order could not contain. The Aramaic term used in the Book of Giants and the Enochic tradition for these beings is naphalin, the same root as the Hebrew. The fallen ones, the descended ones. Beings defined not by height but by origin, by the fact that they came from above, that they should not have existed in the terrestrial realm at all, and that their very presence constituted a violation of the boundaries set at creation. Now add the New Testament to this chain of evidence. Jude verse 6. The angels who did not keep their own position but abandoned their proper dwelling, he has kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day. Peter's second letter, chapter 2. God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into Tartarus and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment. The apostles are not writing about beings who were simply tall. They are writing about beings who crossed a boundary, who abandoned their proper dwelling, and who were judged specifically for that transgression. The language matches the Hebrew perfectly. Nephilim, those who fell, those who descended from where they were meant to stay. The ancient world, the Enochic tradition, the Dead Sea Scrolls community, the apostles, the early church fathers, built their entire understanding of Genesis 6 around the fallen nature of these beings, not their physical stature, their transgression, their origin, their designation as those who crossed downward from the divine into the terrestrial. The English word giants captured none of that. It took a cosmological designation, stripped it of its theological architecture, and replaced it with a measurement. The translation sitting in your hand made a decision at Genesis 6:4. It took a Hebrew word rooted in the verb to fall and replaced it with a physical description that was never in the original text. It took gigantes from the Septuagint, a word that in its original Greek context meant earthborn, rebellious, cosmologically misplaced, and compressed it down to a single English adjective that tells you nothing about what the Hebrew actually said. Here is what the evidence shows. The Hebrew word Nephilim means fallen ones. Its root is naphal, to fall, to descend, to cross downward from one realm to another. It appears exactly twice in the Hebrew Bible. One appearance is in Genesis 6:4, where the Bene Ha-Elohim have already descended into the human realm. The other is in Numbers 13:33, in the testimony of 10 spies the biblical court explicitly labeled as giving a false report. The word giants entered the tradition through the Septuagint's gigantes, a Greek word with a cosmological meaning that eroded over centuries into a physical one. Jerome's Latin Vulgate preserved it. The King James and its descendants inherited it, and 4 centuries of English-speaking Christianity read it without ever being told what the Hebrew root said. Your Bible gave you a size. The Hebrew gave you a story. The Nephilim were not defined by how tall they stood. They were defined by the fact that they fell. Case closed. Now, if the Nephilim were the fallen offspring of the Bene Ha-Elohim, that leaves one open question the Hebrew text addresses with surgical precision. What happened to them after the flood? Because Numbers 13 places them in Canaan, but the flood was supposed to have wiped them out. How do you explain that? The answer lives inside a single Hebrew genealogy, and what it reveals about who was on the ark changes everything you think you know about the flood narrative. I've already opened that case file right here on your screen. Click it. Let's keep digging.